So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Paula Fontana. I am VP of Global Marketing here at Illuminar, and I'm welcoming you to our roundtable on the archetypes of resilience. So really excited about this particular topic. This is something that we've been engaged with the community about really over the last 6 months. So we're going to take you through some introductions. We've got some fabulous panelists here who are all pumped up and ready to share. But this is really intended to be an interactive conversation. So we'll dive into the science of resilience, and then we'll get into a robust discussion. So let's have at it. But before we dive into introductions, I just want to go over some basic housekeeping. Just want to remind everyone this is designed to be interactive, so please jump in with your thoughts. You keep the conversation going in the chat box. This is something that I think we love. In Illuminar webinars, everyone really keeps the conversation going. So whether you choose to chime in live or if you want to engage in the chat box, please share your thoughts. If you have something to contribute live, please raise your hand and we'll promote you to panelist, and you can engage in the conversation. There's no right or wrong answers. All views are welcome. We all have varied perspectives, especially on a topic like this one. So please do share. By popular request, we are recording today's sessions. That's a little different than your normal roundtable. But given we had so many people that were really interested in this topic, just don't say anything incriminating because we will be recording. And the slides in the recording will be shared on Illuminar's website later today. And we are using interactive polling software today, so have your phones or your browsers at the ready. It's always a really fun way to engage. So the panel. So I just introduced myself. James, do you want to take it away?
Sure, absolutely. Looks like we have people from 5 countries, so that's exciting so far. My name is James Green. I'm one of the co-founders of Illuminate Advisory, also one of the global co-founders of the Resilience Think Tank. And unlike Paula, I think there actually are wrong answers, but I'll save that for later.
Don't be judgy, James. All right, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm looking at the participants, and I see some friends and I see some new people that I hope to get connected with soon. So Lisa Jones, Regional Manager for Control Risk, and just like James, I'm also co-founder of the Resilience Think Tank. So looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Russell?
Hi there, everybody. So I'm a United Kingdom voice, and I think I saw 2 people from the UK. I saw Milena and I saw Clint. So hello. So I am the resilience coach, not a resilience coach. I am the resilience coach. We have to get this in for marketing purposes. So I'm a leadership coach, and I work with you on actually what does the resilient you look like, sound like, and feel like? And how do you like to build a resilient team? So in the first instance, I'm all about the human resilience. And this systems and processes of organizations, it's like, meh, what's that all about? It's all about the human.
Awesome. Thank you.
I don't know, Russell. I think that accent is from Texas. I think you're telling me.
Okay, all right.
All right, Jason.
Hey, everyone. And I see there's some Colorado peeps here, too. I reside from the general Denver area in Colorado. I am the Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity Coordinator for Open Technology Solutions. I have about 8 years in the resilience space, and very similar to Russell, in my work, I do focus on people and organizations and how they enable them to be more resilient and capable.
Awesome. Well, we are thrilled to have you, and we're thrilled to have everyone that has joined us from many places around the world. And as we kick off here, I want to pose a question to all of you. So many of you are familiar with Mentimeter. This is our interactive polling software. So either go to menti.com and enter the code 61 40 17 80, or you can just scan the QR code and that'll take you straight to our first poll. So give folks a minute to join here. So our first poll is choose a word that best describes your approach to resilience. Okay, we'll give people a minute to log in and respond to that. If our panelists want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, if Tim Seiner doesn't use the word pirate, I'm going to be disappointed. Be the first wrong answer of the day.
Prepare. I'm curious how our panelists would answer this question. I know yours. I know what yours is, James.
You mean
But
outside
how would-
pirate?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think flexible. I'll
Flexible.
give you a serious answer. I'll use the word flexible.
Okay.
I was
I
just
do
about
like-
to say perseverance when it popped up in the middle there. So perseverance is what's happening today.
I like that holistic and adaptability. Those are pretty good.
For me, I use the word of opportunity. In everything, there's opportunity if you look deep enough.
Yeah. Surprisingly, no one's putting reactive, which we always say that our business continuity plans are reactive and not proactive. So I'm curious to understand when did we make that switch? Are people truly making that switch?
Yeah, that's interesting. And look at what's dead in the center here. Agile, love it. So interesting. Adaptive, agile, proactive, focused, flexible, holistic. This is really great stuff. And so as we think about this, many of you might be new to the world of archetypes. So archetypes have been in practice extensively in the world of marketing, in the world of product, in the service industry. And so they're a really useful way of understanding the people that you're trying to serve, your customers, right? And so as we thought about how we design change, right? How do we connect with our audiences? One of the things that really prompted this endeavor, this whole adventure that we've been on around studying archetypes is really breaking down how do we really drive change in our organizations in a way that feels personal, in a way that feels relatable to our constituents. As I think that's something that we struggle deeply with as organizations, as teams, as individuals, because resilience is just one of those things that I think we all have our own definition of what it means. And I think that's come through in some of the responses here. So thank you for sharing your thoughts there. So let's just go through some of the research, and then we'll dive into discussion. So as we all know, there are a number of factors that influence the topic of resilience. And here at Illuminar, we've been focused on this concept of wargaming to game day, which is this notion that it's not enough to be formally scripted and having kind of that rote, step-by-step list of things that you need to do to respond to crisis and just the daily events that happen. you need to really develop that muscle memory, right? And there's a number of reasons sort of around that. One is ingrained in our stress response. So that's kind of the concept of fight or flight, that if you don't condition people to be ready in that moment, you fall back on your reflexes, right? And so by exposing people to sort of real time in the moment, putting them in that situation as if that situation was happening, you really are able to shape their response more effectively when that event or a like event were to happen in the future. There's also this concept of neural plasticity, and that really goes hand in hand with what we all know to be growth mindset. So the idea that we can change and adapt in response to the experiences and our changing environment in a way that feels fluid. And it allows us to more effectively regulate ourselves and help others through accelerating change, which I think is really important in this day and age. And finally, executive functioning. This is really our ability to make effective decisions and problem solve using data. So how do you really coach that into not only yourself, but also those we serve? And then, and that also relates to this concept of muscle memory. So how do we really coach into ourselves and those we serve this concept of procedural memory or muscle memory, which is the idea that through repeated practice, intentional practice, you're able to make those decision pathways, those movements much more automatic. You're able to get faster, better in your response. So that's sort of the science behind as we think about resilience. And obviously that plays a part in how we function as individuals. I mean, you can't get away from the basic physiology of how we work. There's some other things, obviously that have played into this. So I think one thing, especially as it related to this research and how we were thinking about the topic of resilience at Illuminer, we're looking at ways that we can systemize engagement, right? Because our thesis is without engagement, without empowering and enabling your teams, you can have robust data, you can have the best tool sets, you can have all of this infrastructure, right? But without really empowering your people, it's really very difficult to tap into that. So we looked at resilience across two continuums. So one is really rooted in this concept of systems, and we're all familiar with graphics like this, or sort of the concept that it's not about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward, right? And so there is an element that's really important when we consider resilience. How do we systematize what we do so that it not only scales, but it becomes much more predictable, right? And how we design systems that effectively learn from the mistakes we make, right? The things that happen, so we become better over time. The other is really around this fundamental aspect of relationships. So we all know we're deeply influenced by those around us, and this is actually some insights from HBR, where they had done a story or a study around the relationship aspects of resilience. So fundamentally, our ability to be resilient is really rooted in our ability to connect with others. And so, but how we think about these things are fundamentally different, individual to individual, right? Some of us are much more outgoing, and we're constantly seeking to connect with others more proactively. There are others of us that are more introverted. Sometimes we're a blend, right? But there's also aspects of our preferences around systematizing how we act, right? How do we operate? And so we really wanted to dive in on some of these insights. So we conducted a bunch of research. I won't go into the details here, but happy to discuss that with anyone that's super interested in getting nerdy with me. But went through all this research and ended up with something that looked a lot like this. And so what we did was we scatter plotted across these 2 dimensions of systems and engagement. And what we found were these clusters of, the challenger being this high engagement, low systems archetype, the athlete being high engagement, high systems, and the gambler, of course, being low engagement, low systems, and then the architect, of course, being high systems and low engagement. So, so that ultimately was the outcome from this particular study, and we brought that to a number of individuals in the community to suss out whether this is a valuable way of looking at how do we essentially manage change and manage resiliency within the communities that we serve. So these are the 4 archetypes. I'm going to give you an opportunity to take your archetype, and then we're going to dive into some conversation. But I want to just open up to the panel while everyone's taking their quiz, if you haven't already. And maybe unveil, this is the big unveiling, because I don't think anyone knows what your archetypes are. So you want to talk through what your archetype is, and was it a surprise to you? Did you agree with it? Lisa, I'm curious about your thoughts.
So surprisingly, as I think Jason kind of said this, or one of us said this when we talked about this earlier, my archetype is an athlete, and there's nothing athletic about me other than maybe I can talk a lot. Maybe that's a athletic something, but from looking at that, looking at the attributes of what an athlete is and how I move in the world, it's spot on, except for the point about being competitive. Unless you guys can tell me I'm competitive, then I'll own up to it. But I thought that was interesting in the fact that my motto has always been, being engaged, having a purpose. What is the goal? Setting a vision, doing some things about, looking at planning. So all those things are very important to me when looking at programs and looking at being resilient. So yes, it fit perfectly for me. So.
No, that's interesting around the competitive piece, because you're not the first person to say that. Harvey, I know you had a similar comment.
I did. Oh, are we going formal now?
I knew I was going to do that. I told James I was going to do that sometime.
It's so funny that my names are interchanged. So my first name and my surname, they can be either. So yes, but we'll stick with Russell for now. Yes.
Yes.
So it did make me laugh, because it was literally the first time in my life that I could call myself an athlete. It was literally, wait, yes, get in. I've taken a test and I'm officially an athlete. At any time at school and school sports, I was picked last, or you can go in goal, or you can stand on the sidelines and hold the water. So I am now officially an athlete, which is brilliant and wonderful. It made total sense to me. Similarly to Lisa, around this whole engagement piece. So as I said in my introduction, I'm all about the people. So that is my default state about how can we engage the humans in doing this, in moving forward with this. And it's like, whilst I might say to myself, so Russell, I do know that there are people are different to you, but why aren't they all engaged the same way as me? That was the internal battle that I have going on. And I would be banging my head against a brick wall because the system wasn't coming with me. I have to work hard at, understanding or working with others or flexing or getting some help from others to go, actually, the system's nowhere near where you want them to be. So there's lots of other things that you need to do around this. And what did resonate as well in terms of you can sort of get into a bit of conflict and groupthink. Initially yesterday when we spoke, I was a bit upset. There could be potentially nothing negative about me at all, ever. There's nothing wrong with
of course
anything that I do or say. But I've given in now. I've thought about it for 24 hours, and yeah, we absolutely can fall into the groupthink because I would gravitate to all those people that are also engaged. So there is a risk that Lisa and I would be in a corner going, "We're highly engaged. This is the way to do it," and forget about the systems that are in it. And then the conflict side of things was a case of just the fact that people would hear me talk in a highly engaged way, and you could clearly see that their eyes were glazed over. And it didn't matter how much to try to engage them. We weren't on the same page, essentially.
Yeah, that's an important point that we're going to dive into in a bit. James, I know you have a unique view on the archetypes.
I would think my family says I have a unique view on a lot of things, Paula. But first of all, I want everyone to get some background. When Paula first shared, she started sketching this out before her and her team did all the research and put together. I was like, this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in our industry. And as she knows and her team knows, I hammered them until all of this happened. So thank you for that. There's also, I'm not allowed to use the chat today. I guess I'm in timeout.
You've been locked out.
I've been locked out. That's where their risk appetite is. But if Paula, if you or Marcus or somebody could drop the blog post for the archetypes into the chat, I think that'd be very helpful for people. And the reason I share that, when I first took the assessment or when you were building this, I thought for sure I was going to be a gambler. And I was very surprised to find out that I was a challenger. But in reading through the article, a lot of it made sense. There's a lot of context there. The other thing I want people to take away from this, we're not saying that one of these four is better than the other three. Yeah. These are all valid ways to be thinking about resilience as a person and as an organization. These are just ways to help you identify who you are, what your organization is, and how you should work together. That being said, I think Challenger should be renamed Pirate, because a pirate is collaborative. There's a whole pirate ship. There's a whole crew. You can't be a pirate by yourself. So I want to start a campaign that we consider that.
All right, so I just popped in the into the chat, the blog, which you'll also find when you learn about your archetype, and then there's a button that says learn more that'll take you straight there as well. And then for those of you that were not able to scan the QR, go ahead and click on the link that I just posted to the chat, and that'll take you straight to the quiz. And so it's interesting checking out everyone's results here. We actually have a Menti poll. So I'm gonna switch to the Menti poll so we can all weigh in on what our archetypes are. And while Jason,
I've just got all sorts of pirate themes going in my head. I've got Pieces of Eight. I've got Shiver Me Timbers. I've got Walk the Plank. It's just my brain's just exploded with pirate analogies. I need something else. Somebody please put something else in the chat so my brain can have something else to think about.
Well, I think what's interesting is it's very Challenger-like to come up with something off the map, like something rogue. So when James told me that, no, he's not the Challenger, he's the pirate, that totally made sense to me. Because of course we're not going to go with the flow. So yeah, if you want to log into Menti and enter the code 6140 1780, we can take an informal poll here on how, when I was looking at some of the data on the back of this, which is super fascinating, about kind of where people are and how they think about themselves. Like we have a lot of challengers in the community, which is really very exciting. I think that's an exciting statement about kind of where people are in terms of their approach to resiliency. Not that there's anyone, I think there are elements about each one of these that are really important. Jason, you haven't had a chance to chime in with yours.
Well, Depending on the day, I could be any one of these, but at the time when I took the quiz, it identified me as the challenger, which I agree. And if I have any former coworkers in here or leaders, I think they would also painfully agree with that. But to draw analogies to James Pirate and the Challenger, I believe it's a good fit, as in a pirate may not have a leg, so they put in something different. They put in maybe a wooden pole so they can hobble around. An eye patch, one eye's not working, let's cover it up, and go from there. Maybe they'll push things a little bit more and maybe put a bird on their shoulder and do things. And when they're really feeling it, let's go take over another ship and fund the program some more. But yeah, I feel I'm definitely a challenger. I'm always seeking improvement. I like to set up camp in the gray areas of organizations to make them no longer gray. And I can be subject to analysis paralysis at times, getting into the weeds and overanalyzing things and going down the rabbit hole of what ifs. I do feel that a challenger can also poorly time debates and questions because things are relevant. They're on our minds. We want to talk about them right now. We want to ferret it out. So sometimes timing is a challenge for the challenger. I also think that the challenger focuses a lot on innovation. We want to push our organizations and our people to be more. We see the good in everyone, and we want everyone to rise to their personal best. So yeah, today I'm the challenger. Tomorrow I might be the gambler. Next month, maybe an athlete, but I'm built for a cubicle. So if I'm an athlete, it's on the bench.
So it looks like we've got James Knox from our roundtable here. James, you should be able to talk now.
Yeah, so I think the general role of any resiliency expert is core the challenger, because gaps finding. I mean, you have to challenge, what is it we're doing? Where is it we need to go? And if you're not doing that, then you're kind of stuck in a program or state of, kind of like an ostrich with their head in the sand. We don't have issues here. I can see the other roles being depending on the time of the year, where your program's at. Certainly need to put on those hats, but you should always be asking. And I think this is the key thing to every role in our position, the what if, what next?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was something that came up in some of our prep sessions as well, that your archetypes can be very fluid, and how you might operate in one environment might be different than the way you would operate in another. Curious about, Lisa, maybe how you've adapted your style in a way that allowed you to connect with others.
Yeah, so I would say that just in general, it's a combination of understanding what your expertise is and what are your strengths, as well as looking at the organization that you're working with to understand where they fall in the spectrum of whether the organizational culture. So one of the things that I studied in organizational learning was about the structure, about organizational culture, and it's very I think you unconsciously don't think about that until you actually get into an industry or organization. When you see like mission statements or the external way that an organization looks, and then you actually get into the organization and see what the social cues are, what is the true organizational culture. That's when you have to truly shift, and that's when it comes when you think about emotional intelligence and dealing with others. So an example for me, I've worked in several organizations, and the cultures have been totally different. So one was very almost like an athlete, which I excelled very well in, because we all had the same process, same thought, same common goal. Then went to an organization that was more like a gambler, and trying to get them to be athletic, although they thought they were, and they were truly not. So, I was, beating against something that was unfamiliar with me. So how do I take on those attributes that, attributes that that spoke to them, as well as challenging them to get to a place which I felt, was probably more comfortable for me, but ultimately may not have worked for that organization.
Yeah, that's interesting. Reminds me of something that that Marcus posted last night on social. And Marcus, I don't know if you want to chime in here as well, where he was talking about the importance of understanding what type your boss is, or what type your teams are. And what's interesting is that Marcus and I are actually the same type. And that doesn't always mean that it's a smooth road either. So sometimes it can be even more challenging to work with others in your same type. And so, but I think the key thing is understanding. Marcus, I don't know if you want to chime in around your observations around the archetypes and how it relates to the change efforts that we're looking to drive in our organizations. I don't know if you can talk.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Excellent. Well, I'll be quick because I'm actually in an Uber and it's pretty loud. But yeah, I think one of the key things, as you know, our whole team went through the archetype process as well, and we obviously got talking about this. Is I think it's really important to start understanding your audience around you, up, down, across. Like, what does your team look like? How do you engage with them? How is that going to shape how you think about your program and your whole approach to resilience? So funnily enough, I think a lot of the Illumina team, there is a bunch of challenges in there. I think mostly challenges. I just saw Leah came up, not as a challenger, but she still thinks she is a challenger to a certain extent, which I totally agree with, actually.
Yeah, I do
knowing
too.
Leah Andrews very well. But yeah, I think it's, again, just know your audience, right? And to that point before, there's a lot of fluidity there as well. I don't think anything's going to be constant. There's probably some change there as you grow and shape along with your team and your organization.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Donna, I see you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon what Lisa was saying with the diverse cultures that she's experienced, and also with Marcus's comment about understanding your audience, that you really become sort of a chameleon of archetypes depending on the given day. You might have a predominant one, like in my case, it's the challenger. But when I worked at a hospitality company, our program, the head of program and our team was mostly challengers. But when we dealt with different hotels, boots on the ground, we had a vast difference of what those teams look like. So it definitely forced us to have to change our approach and how we approach that particular team, depending on what country they resided in, what cultural differences they were, just their style of management and things like that. Because if you go in as the constant challenger, it's not always going to give you the best results either.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, definitely that whole aspect of being adaptive. Katie, I think you can talk.
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Hi, Paula. Hey, everybody. Thanks for putting this on. I am totally fascinated with methods of assessing resilience. So I really appreciate, a new model coming out and offering another way to do this, especially when we're talking about individual resilience in the context of organizational resilience, because that's, I think that's really our key to success. So my question is, this assessment is really individual focused, and everybody here is responding with their own sort of thoughts and perspective in mind. How do you then extrapolate the individual result for your organization to sort of get an assessment of what your organizational resilience looks like as a whole from this assessment?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question. I'm wondering if anyone took it as if they were their company. Do we have anyone that went through it that way? or considered how this might extrapolate, like Katie said, to your
Yeah,
brand?
Paula, I certainly I was on site at a client this week. So when you sent us this assessment, I also looked at it through their lens.
Oh, I
as
love
well.
that.
And they were an architect, which did not surprise me at all. But Katie, I think to answer your question, when you're looking at how do I assess my organization, you look at what's important to that organization. So for this client, I was like, where are they spending their resilience resources in terms of time, effort, risk appetite? Because that's where most organizations will show you their culture or what they care about based on where they're investing time and resources. So when I looked at, the client I was at this week, I looked through that lens of, okay, what have they told me as their strategic advisor, as their consultant is important to them? Where are they willing to invest resources and time and energy in their resilience program?
Thank you. I think that's, that makes a lot of sense, from the companies I've worked with as a resilience consultant. I would, my challenge is, like, if I asked 3 different members of the C-suite to respond to this, I'd probably get 3 different answers. So I think an interesting, and it could be an interesting way to look at this data, is looking at the individual archetypes that turn up for your people. What does that tell you about the resilience of that team? So is there a way to measure, okay, if I'm hiring more challengers, I'm ending up with more resilience because of X, or, I need more athletes in this particular role to drive resilience because of Y. I think that looking at how individual resilience drives organizational resilience is really interesting. And you guys have basically just created a model to do that.
Yeah.
And I just want to jump in, and I know Jason is chomping at the bit, but really quickly, when you think about this, if you take the overall posture of the organization and then the team mindset of the organization, and you mesh those 2 things together. So that was spot on, Katie, when you talk about, let's say the posture of the organization is archetype, but the people that work are more challengers or athletes. How does that work for the organization to succeed? Also, on the converse is, if you think about organizations that are very regulated or standardized, and they are required to be probably more of an architect, yet you have this challenging, you have challengers or gamblers. How do you move the needle to get them to be more systematic, and those type of things? So interesting argument. But Jason, I know you had something to say.
Oh, for sure. And this, as I was emailing the group last night, I kind of had an epiphany aha moment. And to me, I think personas, which is the individual, informs the group of individuals, that archetype. And for me, we look at our environment. If an organization is in a rapidly changing environment, it may need to be more agile and adaptable. What type of archetype or persona fits that? From a culture perspective, looking at a strong culture of innovation, they may be more likely to take risks, experiment, which could lead to greater resilience. What type of traits are aligned to that? And then looking at the goals and objectives of the organization or the business unit. If it aims to become a market leader, they might have to be more aggressive and competitive to achieve this goal, which is, assuming more risk, more of the gambler type. And then we have our leadership portion, which, if we have a leader focused on innovation or other things, that will trickle down, because as in with a lot of leadership, it's a top-down type view of how that informs the rest of the personas and archetypes. And also in thinking, take it even further back, a former leader could also influence the future leader by the people that they hire, put in place, develop those hiring committees, because they will have those personas and archetypes there, which could then bias the organization going forward based on previous leadership. So if we wrap all these things up, it might be a way to use this data to measure the resilience of an organization.
And like Lisa said, that industry is so important. If we had surgery scheduled at a hospital tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., would you go to a hospital where they put a premium on winging it? you would not like go to a hospital, I don't think, where you're like, oh, we're gamblers, or
But
you
that's
wouldn't put your
interesting though,
money.
James.
So
Let's
like,
talk
I don't
about
know.
that, because what was interesting when I was testing the gambler in particular, because the gambler at first, when we designed the model, we were thinking that, oh, well, this is going to be, I think because we're so in this mindset of the maturity model, right? Like you start here in infancy and then you grow up to be perfectly resilient. Like we weren't thinking of it, and we thought of it as more of a progressive thing, right? But when I was talking to Lisa, when we were testing the archetypes, and she's like, oh, yeah. She's like, the gambler, like that totally makes sense. Like hospitals are a great example of that. Or even startups are another great example of that, where you have a North Star, right? You kind of have a general direction, but you don't necessarily have the resource to systematize and even align the team all the time, right? Because you're going a million different directions. And Lisa, I don't know if you want to chime in about that. And then I know Tim had something to say as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I work for a hospital, and the one thing that I always say about hospitals and health systems just in general, they're the last frontier when we talk about resilience. They're very focused on the technology. Technology is important. They're very focused on the people. We need to save people, but the true systems that they have in place are shaky at best. A lot of things are ad hoc. I mean, they will say, okay, we can triage mass casualties, let's get on it. But when it comes to actual, well, what about your HR and payroll? Oh, we'll figure that out in the end. As long as we have these systems in place, we have these, electronic health records we can get to, we can do all these other things. On the back end, tell them to go to manual processes. They will lose their minds. I mean, writing out, I had doctors that didn't know how to write scripts because they were so used to using iPads and things like that. So it's amazing to think, or research. Oh my God, research. They have research on localized computers, and God forbid you tell them that they need passwords. Like, why do I need a password? I don't understand. That's too hard for me. So I truly see that. And it's just, it was interesting when me and Paula were talking about that, because I was like, that is totally.
Yeah, Nicole makes a great point. Nicole makes a great point in the chat about the difference between research and teaching hospitals and more traditional hospitals. Certainly, the hospital and the doctors and staff that did the first ever heart transplant, you need gamblers to do that. But if your child has their tonsils being taken out, that's probably not, I wouldn't go to a gambler hospital for something that we now consider routine or matter of course.
There's a few things that are just bubbling around in my head on this one. I think this is just another great opportunity to attempt to find some form of balance, because we all know it's not a one size fits all. It's just another great way to try and get people to just do the age old balance on systems, people and process in some way, shape or form. Because when I was thinking about the challenge one, there's a tiny part of me that's thinking I need to talk to the athlete because it's still on 0, I think, on Mentimeter, and there's like, 10, 15 challenges around all over the place. But if you think about the challenge of challenging assumptions, they're okay with being uncomfortable. So it's from my engagement athlete head, I'm thinking about actually, yeah, but when are people ready to be uncomfortable? We have to, find a variety of ways to enable people to sort of actually understand that something's wrong and raise their awareness, but then they have to accept it, and then they have to be willing to do something about it. And if they get challenged sort of too much, then they're just going to batten down the hatches and they are going to bury their heads in the sand. So I think it's just a brilliant opportunity for challengers and athletes to work together in that sense, is what that feels like to me.
I think Russell, go ahead, Paula.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, just to pile on too, this is also how we can dissect personas versus archetypes, or personal resilience versus organizational resilience. If I'm going to express personal resilience, depending how I received my injury and under what circumstances, might be risky going to a public hospital, because then things like police reports and all those other wonderful things may come into play. Maybe a back alley is where I belong, depending on that injury. But again, it's how we leverage our own personal risk appetite and how that informs our persona as well as the archetype and how we move forward through risk.
Tim, I know you've been patiently waiting. I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, great conversation. So, and I'm just sitting absorbing happily. Yeah, I mean, James is probably cringing right now because he knows I have opinions that don't necessarily go well, but I promise this one's okay. No, all I was going to say was what I found interesting when I looked at the survey was, I think there's an opportunity to, what was being talked about earlier was there's an opportunity to have someone in a relatively senior position take that survey as the company, but then have everyone who's involved in the process take that survey as an individual and then take a look at the results. Because while there is a definite benefit, and I can't remember who said it earlier, but there's a definitive benefit to having like a range of personality types. I can't advocate that enough. In every single situation, not everyone agreed, and it's good to have that because you get the conflicting ideas, you get the concepts you hadn't thought of. But it's also good to know, okay, here's maybe it's your team, or maybe it's groups from different teams, and here's where their beliefs lie in how things should be approached. So you know those hurdles before you get there, but also you kind of have an idea of what to expect from that group. And it's not to make everyone conform, but it's just to have that eyes wide open sort of moment.
Yeah, I love that idea of having someone in your leadership team take it on behalf of the brand or the company, and then looking at how that breaks down across the organization. It was interesting when we went through the quiz as Illuminer. I mean, there are distinct archetypes for various roles, and it's interesting that there seems to be a predisposition among the community, because I do think we're engaged with a lot of change leaders, right? And so, but that's not the only mindset that's important, right? Like the architect, obviously low engagement, but high on systems. Like we need those people to be able to scale things. We need those people to really think through the details of how these things are sustainable. And so getting a pulse for the balance, and this is an article that Lisa shared last night. And I think like one of the hallmarks of a great team is the diversity on the team, and the fact that you can find harmony amidst different opinions, right? And this whole concept of psychological safety, where you can share ideas that might be different than anyone else, and yet you can still move forward together. So I'm looking at the chat here. The neurotic, in my humble opinion, everyone needs a chaotic, neutral cat that says, "What if I just do this?" I love that. I mean, sometimes that's the impetus for change.
Yeah, and I was just going to piggyback on what Tim said. I love the fact that you say if you would like to see what the leader does this as the brand of the organization, and what the actual team, their personas are. For me, that makes perfect sense in the way of, when you understand what the brand is, but you also understand how your people are, you can tailor your information, or what will resonate with that, or with that team. And we do that all the time when we go into organizations and we help build programs or plans or whatever that may be. We have to take different approaches. What may resonate with an architect may not resonate with a challenger. So understanding those things, it just gives us a leg up, at least as a start. I mean, we still may butt heads because of what our attributes are, but also we do move fluently through the various archetypes with the certain attributes that we need to put in place. The chameleon as we are. I love that, Donna. That's going to be my new my new emoji, I guess.
So how does this lay out and manifest in different countries? As you're working internationally?
Yeah, Russell brought up a valid point about this, about even cultural, cultural norms are different. What we call that, what a business, we call it cultural intelligence. Like if you see what can work in Japan or China may not work in America. We are very in your face. How you doing? Let's work, hash things out. In China and Japan, they're very leadership driven. They only, they want clear direction. They're not going to, divvy from that. They're not going to pivot. So same thing, how do you look at these archetypes to apply that culturally?
Yeah, because it's like, traditionally the British side of things, it is that sort of stiff upper lip, not say anything, but it's also, passive aggressive in terms of speaking for a whole nation right now. Feel free. There's a couple of others that are in the UK, but that's traditionally what we will do. We won't say quite so much in a meeting. It's when we go to the water coolers afterwards or walk away from the meeting that we might actually give our true, open and honest opinion. Whereas other countries, there's a strongly likelihood that they'll say it in the room, and they'll say it vociferously in the room. And then, other cultures that they'll never say anything at all. They'll just potentially see that it can be going wrong, never challenge it, and just, we'll sit there and it all falling around, beside them, because actually the idea of saying something or speaking up is just too, ingrained in them around it. So yeah, I'm just really curious. I did come from the fact that, yes, my traditional expectation is that, work in the UK, I'm the one that is saying hello to people in the room. You go to the US, everybody comes straight up to me and goes, hello, my name is, let me tell you about myself. This is who I am. These are what my strengths are. These are what my skills are. You don't get that in the UK. They're just like, all right, hello. And then it's me that has to draw it out of them.
Yeah, and actually, you just reminded me of one of my favorite books of all time is The Culture Map. It's written by Erin Meyer, and she talks in depth about cultural influences and how that shapes the way that we relate to one another, right? The ways in which we engage, the ways in which we perceive things, and how those things are really programmed into us from a very early age, and in turn it affects our inherent biases, and it is interesting, having conversations, with folks around the world around even the concept of risk, right? Some cultures don't like to talk about risk. I think in the US and EMEA, I think we're more comfortable being overt about those sorts of topics, but in the Middle East, that's not necessarily the case. So, being mindful of people's perceptions, because perception is reality, right? And really, kind of putting yourself in their shoes before you go to communicate with them, as you design your program, really understanding how you're going to design a strategy that's really going to not only reach them from a communication perspective, but how do you really embed yourself in the way that they operate. And I think that's the big challenge of resiliency is that we're weaving resiliency into the fabric of everything the organization does. And sometimes that's a very foreign thing when you haven't been in that role before, right? So how do you partner with those individuals to really move that forward?
And bookend what Lisa said around cultural intelligence, which I'm totally stealing that Thank you, Lisa. I look at it as, archetypes manifest in different ways in different cultures or contexts. And we look at values, beliefs, ways of coping with adversity. Some cultures see it as a sign of weakness when they ask for help or reach out for help, which could impact our ability to find resiliency or determine resiliency, where other cultures, it's seen as a sign of strength. So it's really getting to know the culture you're working with, and culture doesn't just happen in other countries. It can happen very well within your organization with a very diverse culture there. So you may have to adapt to that culture within your organization and identify the ones where maybe it's a weakness to ask for help, where others are very verbose and have no problems asking for help, and then create a plan to help support them and raise them up a little bit more, knowing that their voices may not be as prevalent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nicole also makes a really interesting point here about the information we seek. She's giving this example of this book, The Great Rhino, is a bestseller in China, but hasn't gotten anywhere near the same attention in the US. So our preferences also influence how we engage in the marketplace. Obviously the content we read and engage with. I think that goes alongside, put yourself in situations where you're reading content outside of what you ordinarily would, right? And you're helping to bridge that divide more proactively.
So the big thing that's coming up to me for all of this right now is just how do we utilize this to support, enable more people to be open and curious. That's the thing that's sort of really just bubbling around my head as, yet another positive byproduct of all of this. Because we've all got our own ideas and thoughts around what is working, what isn't working, what should be changed, what shouldn't be changed, what should stay the same, what needs to be challenged, what needs to be left alone. And so in all of this, I'm still once again thinking about openness and curiosity, which comes from the learning piece. So I know that I always talk about resilience as spring forward with learning because of, if we talk about a bounce back, there's a risk that we won't have learned. So I know I'm a bit obsessed with it in terms of the spring forward learning, but to be able to do that, you have to be open and curious. So I am mindful the same, even though I said it's a little bit as a joke. When I looked at the archetype that I was, the athlete, part of me did immediately go into, well, mine's the best then. Because that's me. I'm fabulous, brilliant. I'm an athlete, and let's look at what's wrong with all the others. So I can be open and honest that I did a tiny bit of that. Then I had a word with myself, and I've been looking at what's the value and the benefit of all the other archetypes, and when would I actually go to a gambler? When would I go to a challenger? When would I go to an architect? How could they help me? But I'm wondering if that is driven by something else, because I've got a high collaboration driver. That's a strength of mine. I always want to do things with other people. And there are others that don't have that energizer about them. So all of this has just made me thinking about, how do we find yet more ways to just enable people to be open to the idea of doing something differently? How can we support that?
James, what are your thoughts about that? How do we engage others that might be reluctant?
I think you have to find out how people are comfortable in sharing information. And us being on Zoom right now is a great example of that. I have some customers where every call is video. And I have some customers where they would never imagine being on video all the time is horrifying. So part of it is just, figuring out things like that. How do people like to engage? Is it in person? Is it audio only? Is it video? Where are people most comfortable expressing their point? There's a lot going on in the chat right now that I'm very excited about. A lot of discussion around culture. Tim said, are you making cultural assumption about other cultures? I know Americans never do anything like that, so that's very unusual for us Americans. It's a great comment about simple gestures. How do you greet people? Left hand, right hand, things like that are hugely important in various cultures. All of those, I think, go towards knowing the cultural norms, the mores, how people like to receive and discuss information, how they're comfortable with sharing information. Really goes to Russell's comment of how they're going to open up to you. And so you can really start to have some meaningful dialogue around resilience in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's come through in a number of the game changer interviews. This concept of relating to people on an individual level, to help, so you understand, what are the things that motivate them, what are the things that, they're looking to avoid, and really getting at that, what's in it for them. So you really can't negate the powerful impact of connecting with others first before trying to impose change on people. And what's interesting is that, by engaging them in your change efforts, notably with resilience and risk awareness, they have the potential to really shape what you're doing differently, which is powerful collaboration. I know we're quickly running out of time here. Just some observations, I guess, looking at the panel. As you think about resilience archetypes and how we take this forward and apply it more effectively in our organizations, what would be some of those practical applications and strategies that people can use outside of those that we already discussed?
Well, one thing I would say is that as we were talking about this, is to not to pigeonhole yourself, okay, pirate, as well as the organization of what you consider the archetype to be. Because again, just like we can be fluid in some of those attributes that we have. If we go into an organization and we say, okay, yes, this organization are athletes, we may miss out on the true resilience of our program. We may miss opportunities because we are focused too much on a certain archetype. We can use that as a baseline, which is great. But we need to not only not pigeonhole ourselves, but also not pigeonhole our organization.
Yeah, and I think that, Lisa, that's so important because you would expect an organization's legal and marketing departments, for example, to have different archetypes within those departments by design.
Yeah, absolutely. So I brought up how to get our last poll for this session. What will you do with this information? For those of you that have ideas on how you will take this going forward or how others could use this, would love to get your insights. But Jason,
I'm thinking back to
go ahead.
sorry. I was thinking back to, I can't remember exactly what I was putting in the chat earlier on about, diversity of thought. It is the, diversity element that's coming up to me now around, that is some of the best ways to really start some great conversations, is just really encouraging the fact that there are these different types. These are what they bring to the table. This is where they're useful. It's a real quality conversation about the pros and cons of each of these different archetypes. It's just yet another opportunity to appreciate the difference in others. I think it's just, focus on that. It would be really useful.
Yeah, and kind of again bookend what Russell was saying about that. When we're looking at archetypes and personas and all of those wonderful things, there's always the potential for stereotyping, stigmatization, tokenism, and we need to be aware of our own bias with this. We need to be respectful of diversity and make sure that we're being inclusive and equitable. And these archetypes are really just a starting point for conversation. This is where relationship building will really come into play, where we get to know the organization and the team members that makes up that organization. And really at that point, can we really get to meaningful work around resilience?
Yeah, I love that. These are some great ideas. Make my boss walk the plank. That must be one of your fellow pirates, James. Think about how I interact with others, play to strengths, as well as recognize weaknesses. Engaging customers, I think that's an interesting one. You know, how do we apply this to work with our stakeholders, whether they be external to our organization, third parties, to build more effective relationships and orchestrate more effective change. Consider variability in approach when discussing resiliency, kind of meeting people where they are, right? And seeing how I can maximize our impact using the unique strengths of each type. I think that's a really important one because we all have strengths that are part of our natural tendencies. Does this align with academically proven models? That's an interesting question. So it's definitely a very different approach. I mean, we did try to pull from secondary research, and that might be an interesting topic for a blog. Team building activity, I love that. Work on being open to others' perspectives while trying to foster curiosity and openness in others. I think that's what it's all about. So we tried to keep it light. We tried to keep it fun to do because I think there's a lot of different assessments out there that kind of get into the nuts and bolts of how you build your program, whereas this is really about how people naturally engage with one another and their tendencies as it relates to work. Sharing the information internally to discuss how we now equip with a perspective, shape our approach to embedding program enhancements and partnership with other risk domains. Yeah, like the other, that's a key piece of this. I don't think we got into all that much in the conversation, which is interesting because I would have thought, like, if we would have had this conversation 3 years ago, I think it would have been different. But I think the fact that we're becoming much more integrated with other risk domains, it's not as much of a focus, and there's so much focus on connecting with the business, which I think is exciting progress. Yeah, using as an icebreaker. Panel, what are your thoughts in terms of some of these insights? Anything that you're particularly inspired to do?
I suppose it might just be confirmation bias, but I do like the one about working on being more curious and fostering curiosity and openness in others. That really resonated with me, I think partially because that's where my head was at. But yeah, fostering curiosity in others, it's just so key in the resilience space. You've just got to keep finding ways to sort of be open as much as humanly possible to the idea of doing something differently, whilst there are some other things that stay the same, so you don't feel like you're in total chaos, but really consider what it is that you want to be the same. And that's like, your values, your purpose, your strengths, your relationships. That's what you keep the same, that enables you to be open. So that one really struck me.
Yeah, and I love the fact.
I'd love to see some.
Go ahead, James.
No, go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was going to give you kudos because I was going to say I want to take James' approach and look at some of the organizations that I'm working with to see where they fall on the spectrum. What I think they may be and what they probably are could be two different things, but I love that approach of taking that into a place to see, to kind of level set.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'd love to see some follow-up down the road from the audience of what their personal resilience archetype is and what their organization's resilience archetype is. I think that'd be a really interesting, thing to look at and discuss.
Another thing I would say, just real quick, is that is this too touchy-feely for our industry? I'm just wondering. We are very we're taking this very theologian type of existential conversation that we don't normally have. We look at processes, recovery, back to business as usual. This is very touchy-feely and very new, which I love. That I'm all about it as an athlete. I'm just curious to see how this can be embraced within our industry.
And with that, Lisa, I would also be curious on how the archetypes inform the DEI within organizations too, the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do those traits amongst leaders and executive staff really trickle down into the DEI initiative for organizations and how they support that.
You get the gold star on that one.
Well, I channeled my inner DRJ conference. The DEI was a really an important conversation and continues to be one too. And I think we can make the leap to where the challenger, athlete, gambler, architect, and how they tie into DEI and how each one lifts up different components of that to support a culture of inclusiveness and openness.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing coming out of this is that, it's good to embrace diverse perspectives, diversity of opinion, understand where people are coming from and really use that to your benefit. So yeah, excited about continuing the conversation. We're going to be sharing out some insights from this roundtable discussion following the event. So look for the recording, that blog. We also have a few, we have some archetype cards, which are a guide to different archetypes that you can use to strategize. How do you work with others of the same type or different types and ways in which you can more effectively manage change in our diverse institutions. So I just have a couple of announcements and then we'll let everyone go back to their day. We have an upcoming webinar, actually a big resilience reset coming up here next week. It's about cybersecurity, SOS, shiny object syndrome, back to basics. And the fundamental idea here is that amidst all of kind of this technology craze, lots of different things that we can be doing as teams to embrace technology. How do we ensure that we're not being overwhelmed by kind of what's out there, right? How do we focus on those things that are most material to our business and drive impact and change by focusing on those things that are most important? And then finally, we've got another webinar coming up, and both of these are posted out on the website, embedding learning for success. And we're going to be joined by a couple of our partners from BDO, Mike Geyer and Sydney Weinstein, and Leon will be facilitating that with them. So this is a really exciting webinar. This is going to be talking about the value of gamification and really bringing that to life and really how do you do that end-to-end methodology combined with technology. So definitely check that out. And I will post these links in the chat. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Really enjoy the discussion and hope to see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.